Okay, so I'm with John and Brandon from Sanitas Pacifica, short film that's in competition at Fusion at our festival. Congratulations, guys.
Thank you so much.
And you're the composer, I believe.
That's correct, yes,
and
sir.
you're the filmmaker. I refer to you as a filmmaker.
That's fine.
The power behind the frame.
That's great, yeah.
Or maybe that's the composer. Who would like to tell? Well done. Who would like to tell me what this film is? I know it's about. I've seen it, but if you could just tell me. Mm-hmm. Who's going to give us the film? Is this just for the?
It's about it's a film about an older man who goes to a house and has an experience with a medium. He's trying to kind of make peace with some trauma that happened in his past. He'd kind of tried everything else, so he kind of goes out on a limb and has this very strange existential experience with a medium and kind of learns to forgive himself and finally accept what happened to him.
So we'll get on to how you had to presumably create this moody, dark-ish sort of music track to this, but where does this all kind of... It's a stupid question because I often ask this. Well, yeah, because look, I always like to know how and why a film was made, and obviously the story, because often you get very interesting reasons for, not always, but how did the whole project come about?
Honestly, him and I spent several big weekends together.
So he's not just the composer then?
He's
just the composer.
Yeah. God, so we're brothers.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Right. Of course.
Yeah. So we've always been into that side of life, I shall say, and we've had a couple of experiences together, and we used to always talk about how there's an interesting degree of time in the most powerful moments in your life. I think a lot of times people can think back, and sometimes things happen slowly over time, but sometimes some of the bigger things in life happen in moments. And I was very interested in figuring out how to tell a story that seemed to take place over someone's entire life and have it happen in either a single moment or to not have happened at all. And I got very interested in the idea of that at first, and then trying to find a vehicle for it. Eventually it made sense to me to use an older person who would have had the most life to look back on. And
then compressing it into, what is it, a 15-minute film?
It's a little over an hour.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It's sorry. Of course it is, yeah. So that's still... Okay, yeah. So, how are you going to do that? Because a person's lifetime is a bloody long time. Hopefully, it's a long time. If you know. So, how are you going to compress that into that time span?
Well, I don't know. I was interested in. I think when people take trauma through their life, it's almost like time kind of starts to stop for them. Like the years will go by, but if they never really dealt with whatever, if it's intense depression or some kind of PTSD or anything like that, the years go by, the days go by, and yet they're still kind of stuck wherever that trauma took place, and they can't get past it. So I think the idea of having someone deal with all of that stuff in an ambiguous period of time, it's inevitably going to discuss and deal with their life that led up until that point, if that makes sense.
It does make perfect sense, and I'm kind of wondering why you, because you could choose any person's life to look back on, because everyone has events, of course. But why do you choose to use this guy as a point of reference for the story, if that makes sense? Because there's anything you could have thrown into it, isn't it? You know, but there's events in there that you're particularly concentrating on. But why those particular set of things? And is that kind of
I didn't really. It was one of those where I didn't really have a very specific intention for why I was going to be a guy at that age.
Because it could have been a woman. I mean, there's all sorts of things. It could have been anybody. So, you know, I'm sure this wasn't random why you came up with this guy. I mean, there's a reason behind it, and or maybe it happened as you built. I mean, I'm not trying to put words into your mouth here, but maybe it happened as the story went along. In fact, perhaps you can tell us the build for this. How you got the idea between you. You're obviously collaborating, and then you're going, well, okay, well, why don't we do X, Y, or Z, and how does that sort of whole process come to fruition?
This was one of those scripts that definitely kind of a long gestation period, several months where I was just thinking about, made a couple notes and stuff, what I wanted to do, and then when I finally sat down, it just kind of fell out pretty quickly. And when I was trying to decide if I had written A Man initially, and then one of my friends who I went to school with asked me, why don't you use this man we know who ended up playing the lead role. He was one of our professors at school, and he just...
He could.
Well, sadly, he had a very similar a sordid past with some very intense trauma and a lot of very unfortunate things that happened to him and his family when he was growing up and coming of age. And it was just one of those perfect moments where I had just coincidentally been writing something that turned out to be almost his life story.
Wow.
And so when he finally got to read it, it turned out to be a
Trouble
really
is,
intense...
he could have easily said no because it'd be too close to home. I suppose that was the danger, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Because, there's quite, I would imagine, the worry is that they're going to go, wow, this is great, it's just like my life, and that's why I don't want to be part of this project.
I think that's when you know you're dealing with a really brave actor.
Yeah.
Is when they're willing to take something that, too close to home or not, is going to be excited about the fact that maybe this piece will help me. And by the end of that week of shooting and having a whole, entire production period with him, he did eventually tell me that it brought him back to life. And he had been struggling with this stuff for 30 plus years at that point.
That's amazing. I mean, truly,
yeah, couldn't have asked for a more beautiful, intense experience. That the first real feature I was making, to have somebody that, one, I knew him, so we could be intimate about it. I knew everyone in there. The girl who's in this movie as well, she lost one of her parents at a young age and had some trauma affect her and her family as well. So it was kind of like, while we were shooting this, we were also going in and out talking about the script and talking about the real life stuff that was affecting it directly.
Yeah.
So it's super organic.
Now I'm going to say something a little bit controversial, which is good for you, but not necessarily good for you when I say this,
Okay.
which is this is my opinion, is that when it comes to making a film, I think one of the hardest jobs, that they're all hard, right? Because I know filmmaking is bloody tough and it's in the round, is the composing. I just think I'm really amazed at how people take a blank sheet of paper and then suddenly come up with a score. And I know it's not that simple. I know you've probably got the advantage of, because you're brothers and you're working close and you're collaborating all the time, which may help, I don't know. But even so, you've got to come up with something out of the ether. You've got to pull something out of the bag, right? So how, and I love asking this question, how are you getting these ideas? 'Cause how do you arrive at them? Where do they come from?
Right. Well, kind of like what you were getting at earlier, this could have been any sort of traumatic experience. So what's something that's really beautiful about this story in particular is you can kind of put yourself in it with your own trauma. And that's kind of what I did as I tried to write the music.
Can you both compose? Because I imagine you've got a musical family, would I be right? Or perhaps more an artistic family with different strengths? I'm not sure.
Yeah, he's definitely
the music man.
The music man, but we write music together.
Oh, I did one. Yeah, okay.
Outside of this.
Yeah, I did one because you often find that in families, don't you? So, okay, sorry, I interrupted you there.
No problem. I mean, and so that's basically what I did. I tried to put myself through my own version of what this character was going through. And we had a conversation about it. He kind of told me his vision, and I said, okay, just give me like a couple hours. And I sent him back 3 samples from 3 different pieces that get used through the film. And we just found the perfect place for each one, and it just kind of fell together.
Yes, I love this. No, I love this because I'm always, my worry would always be, I spoke to Eddie Torres, who's a composer for Noel the Jewel, and I said, well, the trouble is, the danger is, and I'm sure this has never happened, that you bring up these sets of music and none of them are working. Well, no, because it could happen, couldn't it, right?
Well, you know what? Tell that story first.
Yeah, well, actually, that is what happened first. I made a piece that was more of a song, and you'll see in the film, it's much more like an ambient tone. And so I sent him bits from that, and we talked about it, and we just decided that it didn't quite fit, and that's when we had a long conversation about the more specifics of the direction of the film, and I redirected and kind of came up with a few motifs that I ended up sending to him that fit perfectly. But now that song has its own place in this next phase of things that we're doing, so.
The music is just another example of, and again, maybe this is only, I did not come to this whole filmmaking thing growing up in a studio system where everybody has their bits and pieces.
No, that's right, yeah.
So I keep looking at this as, I can't imagine how you could look at the music, or the editing, or production. It's all a part of writing the film. So like writing a script is just like the bare bones skeleton. You're still writing when you're talking about the music and figuring out the perfect place to put it, when you're mixing, when you're editing. So it's just another extension of
But but all part of filming, there's a pressure, isn't there? Whether it's self-funded or you got crowd-funded or you get a load of money thrown at you, whatever. You're still going to have that. I mean, I have a theory that the more money you have, the more pressure you have, because as you're going up that greasy pole, there's more people that want their cash back,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So J.J. Abrams is a great example. I'm sure he's worth $1 gazillion, but he's still got to bring the fucking bacon home for Disney, right?
Right.
And everyone's going, well, you're doing it, because frankly, I thought the last Star Wars was shit personally, and I thought what he done was pretty decent. And then that other guy took a wrecking ball, and I lost interest in it. So now the pressure's back on him now. So whatever level, you've got to feel it, Yeah. So I guess what I'm getting at is I know you're working together and moving at a pace. But one day, Brandon, you're going to be, I assume, thinking, well, I've got to bring the music to the, and I'm sure it's not quite like that. But you still got to do it to complete the project, haven't you? And it's much the same way you've got to do the script, and the casting, and the filming, and the editing, and the sound design, and the colorization, and everything else that goes into making a film. So it's interesting how you deal with that pressure, because you've got to do it. There's no escape from this. It's not like a clock running down in a football match, right? Either you finish it, or the film is not going to finish. So, and it's the same with you and that part.
For sure, yeah.
What I'm trying to understand is how you deal and cope with that kind of stress.
I mean, one word at a time, one decision at a time, for sure. The way we work specifically, though, is I kind of don't make decisions that'll take me further into the process unless we both think it's a good idea. So it's kind of that sharing the same brain as you move through the process. So when it is finally time to say, all right, now it's time to actually write an appropriate score, or we both acknowledge that we need to put some music in this scene or this moment. It's just not working without it. I don't have to explain why at that point. So if we've collaborated like we usually do, we get to a point where we're so close that kind of knows what is missing already, as opposed to, I cannot imagine handing over a rough cut of a film to some composer you hire. And just trusting that they'll already know what's in your head tonally, or what you think is missing or what is necessary. So even with JJ, I mean, he works with Giacchino like all the time, right? So I think you get relationships in this.
Of course you do. Like Spielberg and Williams. He's about to retire from, I think this next Star Wars is his last one.
So even now I've been doing this just long enough to where when I'm finally cutting stuff together, or even if writing, but definitely when I'm finally editing stuff together, I will begin to hear possibilities for things that I know that he would also be interested in writing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it makes sense. It's enlightening, because you're kind of in not a unique position, a rare position where your brothers weren't together, but it sounds like you know each other very well. So I suppose that takes a part of the danger away of knowing it's going to work, because you work together.
It does. I mean, even before we started collaborating artistically, we've come from the same place mentally, and we just have different ways of doing it. I do it musically, you do it through writing, directing, and so it's just really rare that those things don't come together in a way that really complement each other. So it's very fortunate in that way.
And the message of these thematic things that I was talking about earlier, that you were hoping to pull off with this film, has it ended up being? It's a stupid question, because otherwise you wouldn't have released it. Or another way to put it is, as a percentage, what is it of where you wanted to get to on that journey? Yeah. So is it a 90%, 100%, 85%? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything. You're going to look back and you might see things that you may have done differently.
Yeah. It's dangerous.
But
it's dangerous.
From what you're talking about, like the essential thing that I was trying to get across, I think it comes across. And specifically, I don't think it would have worked without the music that's in it. There are a few things that we kind of have joke about now that are some very specific musical moments that are the essence of the film. And so whenever you hear that, and we ended up, again, just kind of organically realizing, if we have to put that back at the very end, because that's what this film sounds like.
Yeah.
So every time you hear that last final note and it goes black, everyone will still hear that as they go on their journey and they leave the theater or whatever.
Yeah.
No, it's really well explained. No, the one I always like to use as an example is the doom, which everyone knows from Jaws, of course, like 2 notes, and you think it's and it is simple.
Right.
But that's not taking anything away from it, because it's incredible, actually. And you kind of think, well, that seems so obvious. But it's how it can change.
It's the nature of programmatic writing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the music should also tell the story.
Yeah.
And that's one of the cool opportunities about your films that I get to work on, is there's a lot of silence. There's a lot of dialogue, or the dialogue-less parts, where the music is to carry the story forward, as well as, the visual aspect as well. So that presents a lot of really good opportunities for programmatic music, exactly.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. No, it's good stuff. Thanks for a brilliant film, and thank you for turning up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.